So let's face it and be very blunt about it. There is now an overabundance of integrated steel sports luxury watches on the market. It's almost to a point where even I have to refrain myself from saying, really, another one? As you navigate through this busy subset of watches that has become a world all its own, one that manages to make it on the short list despite being overlooked compared to others is the Piaget Polo Date. It's a luxury watch that obviously resembles that of other integrated sports watches like the Nautilus and other heavyweights, but with it being a fraction of the price, is it worth it? Before addressing the elephant in the room any further, let's establish Piaget as a brand and its notable history. Starting back in 1874 in Switzerland by Georges-Edouard Piaget, at the young age of 19, he created a small watchmaking workshop on the family farm of all places that served as the initial foundation for the brand to rise the ranks as a family business over the decades, first as a movement manufacturer and eventually a brand name that was trademarked in the 1940s. In the decades to follow, we begin to see the framework that was used to construct a key pillar of the identity of their modern watchmaking, which is their ultra-thin movements. First in 1957 with the release of the 9P at Basel Watch Fair, which turned heads by way of its remarkable 2mm thickness. It took just a few years for Piaget to outdo themselves with the creation of the thinnest automatic movement in the world in 1960, thanks to the position microrotor within the release of a caliber known as the 12P. This theme of ultra-thin timekeeping extends to their current lineup of watches, including the Altiplano concept that had a case of a baffling 2mm, for context, around the same thickness as a grain of rice. In the 1970s, we saw a flurry of jewelry-oriented timepieces that utilized their knack for movement construction, though in the last chapter of that decade, Piaget released a piece known as the Polo in 1979. The Polo was given its name in reference to the storied game played on horseback, and was a fusion of its fashion-forward jewelry approach with the growing norms of the period of integrated steel sports design. The modern Polo DNA that we have before us in this video came to be in 2016, and unquestionably has shared design characteristics from both their past and around the broader industry. So where does it exactly stack up? The overlap that connects many watches of this ilk tends to start with the case and the bracelet. The Polo measures with a case diameter of 42.3mm paired with a thickness of just 9.5mm and a restrained lug-to-lug of 46.6mm. Regardless of the norm of integrated steel sports watches that often wear larger than their proposed diameter, the Polo, on the contrary, benefits greatly by way of its short lugs and female end length where the bracelet meets the case, making the lug-to-lug wear true to its actual. Factoring all of this in, this surprisingly is probably the best suited case of nearly all of its class for medium to smaller wrists, wearing closer to a 40mm. A mixture of polished and fine brush surfaces are applied throughout the rounded structure. The large surface area occupied by the bezel showcases line brushing horizontally, eventually being interrupted by the polished finish at its curved edge, before meeting brush surfaces again on the case sides. At 3 o'clock, a 5.4mm push-pull crown is set into the case with finely cut grooves providing adequate grip, and is capped off with a polished top. Set between the short curved 21mm lugs sits the H-link bracelet, continuing with the same mixture of polishing and brushing before terminating at a milled butterfly clasp. Opposing the combination of finishes to others on the market, the line brushed finish finds its way on the center links, with it being housed in a polished boundary by way of those connecting H-links. In terms of adjustment, the bracelet does feature pin links and does lack micro adjustment in the clasp, though the Polo benefits greatly from 2 half links and the ability for every individual link to be removed. Set beneath the safety of the sapphire crystal sits the deep blue sunray dial that exhibits a recessed line backdrop, working to further set attention to the important dial callouts for time telling. At the outer edge, a printed minute track runs along the flat surface, marking every 5 minutes with Arabic numerals. Applied polished hour indices filled with lume rise from the line surface with a framed date aperture at 6, balancing the enlarged Piaget text at 12. At its center, polished hour and minute hands at their central point house a strip of superluminova, sitting just below the polished second hand decorated with the diamond P counterweight. Turning the watch around, the sapphire display caseback is screwed into place with 6 flat screw heads, enabling everyday ready 100 meters of water resistance while offering view of the 1110P. As previously mentioned, Piaget's main claim to fame was for its movement production in the ultra-thin family, and although this caliber doesn't quite get to that standard and level of thinness, it does lend itself useful in both general operation as well as creating great wear on the wrist. This movement is based on Piaget's 800P, with the 1110P being comprised of 180 components while sitting 4 millimeters thick. The caliber beats away at 4 Hz or 28,800 vibrations per hour, has hacking and hand winding, hacking stop in the second hand when you pull the crown to the farthest position, with that balance stop being in plain view next to the balance, ready to jump into position following pulling that crown to that farthest point. And to go along with all of this, you have a power reserve of 50 hours. Now, movement finishing is not exceptional, but there are some highlights. The rotor and central bridges feature a circular Côte de Genève finish with mildly beveled edges. You have heat blued screws, perlage on the main plate, and also the engraved coat of arms on the rotor. The caliber features an Edicron-style regulating organ and is regulated at the factory, and when testing across 5 positions through our own tests here, we had it running between +3 to +4 seconds a day on average across those 5 positions. So in trying to conceptualize the Piaget Polo, it obviously is a piece where comparisons are going to be pretty natural, originating from an era of watchmaking that was responsible for one of the most popular current styles today. Getting most of the spotlight is going to be Genta pieces like the Royal Oak, the Nautilus, and the Ingenieur Jumbo SL, as well as pieces like the Vacheron 222, which has now had a bit of a resurgence and have their segment of fanfare that is uniquely its own. And beyond that, then you have a world that I would argue is another collection of pieces such as the Chopard Alpine Eagle, maybe the GP Laureato or the Zenith DeFi Skyline, with some of those watches that I mentioned there being among the first in the category to really bring forth this integrated trend back in the 1970s. And this is not even mentioning the more attainable options, such as something like Baume & Mercier with the Riviera with a 5-day power reserve, and many other brands that are going to be beneath it that quite frankly have developed their own great watches and takes on this style. Now, 2 of the primary cons for me come from the bracelet and the movement. Now, the bracelet does come with half links and full link sizing flexibility, but it does feel a bit less substantial compared to some of the competition. Also, given Piaget's background in movements, I also find the caliber to be finished to a degree that falls slightly short compared to brands at this acclaimed status in this arena. Also keeping in mind that this is a watch that's going to cost close to $15,000. So when you're paying that amount of money, some artisanal finishing techniques are going to be potentially warranted and maybe seen as a must for many different types of collectors out there. Shifting to the pros, the central case exhibits nicely finished surfaces with line brushing creating a pop all its own, all while wearing on the wrist in a mass appealing way. That's one of the things I believe is lost with this piece. It does wear incredible on the wrist. One of the biggest qualms many have with integrated style watches is just how large the cases wear compared to the proposed dimensions. In the case of the Polo, we are getting the exact opposite, with being maybe the best in its class for a candidate for smaller to medium wrists. And the dial, although not being able to be classified as uncommon in its form, is done to an excellent standard that feels in line with the overall offering. So in summation, where does the Polo Date stand within the broader landscape of integrated steel sports watches? Given the absurdity of pricing dynamics that has really run pervasive across this branch of watch designs, it obviously is a worthy consideration for those with a luxury budget that don't desire to play the jumping through hoops game. The obvious pieces that this one will be fighting against is in that $10,000 to $15,000 price range. Watches like the Laureato, Alpine Eagle, DeFi Skyline from Zenith, which is actually going to be slightly below that price of $10,000, and the newly updated Ingenieur. Yet no matter which way you slice it, the Polo is among these top considerations of the now vast landscape of luxury integrated steel sports watches. And for those that are not yet tired of this genre of watchmaking, is one to certainly consider. But all right, guys, that's my take on the Piaget Polo. This was one of the last I felt of its tier generally from a major group brand that I felt we needed to cover when looking at this integrated steel sports watch type of genre. What's your take on the Polo? Have you handled this watch? Have you handled some of its competitor watches that maybe get mentioned alongside of it in its price tier? Where do you see it stacking up compared to the competition? Love to see some comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that as well. And also definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com. TeddyBaldassarre.com is a full authorized dealer of over 30 brands. quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. If you're in the market for a watch, we would absolutely love to have your business. How we're able to fund all these productions is not through having the brands to pay us, just through making all this content. We are all self-funded through selling watches on our site. So if you are in the market, this would mean the world to us because it allows us to keep doing what we're doing, and we want to keep doing what we're doing here for a very long time. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.